They're not gonna know this.
Just kidding.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Why don't we get started in a few minutes here? First off, finally, I got the date right. So this is the big first week of our daylight saving time. So I'll be thrown off for at least a week or so until I adjust to this. So while we're sort of waiting for a few people, some good news that I have to share. Number one, I managed to step on this cockroach right here so that it won't. But the bad news is there's usually more than one. So I don't know if this is the one that we saw earlier, but anyway, he's gone. But keep an eye out for others. I don't know where they come from, but apparently these are roach-infested buildings, but there's one less roach. Other good news I have to share, at least two of my former honors thesis students wrote me yesterday and today saying they were accepted into graduate programs that they applied to. So that's good news for me. I'm always happy to see success in my trainees. Anybody else have similar good news to share, or exciting stories or funny stories, or anything else that's sort of uplifting or inspiring or interesting or funny?
Last week I did a magic show for a charity.
You did a magic show in the sense that you performed magic?
Yes.
That's incredible. What kind of tricks did you do? Is this like stage magic, card magic, or is this like spells that you
Yeah, it would be more like stage magic focused.
stage magic? That sounds like a lot of fun. It sounds like a fun hobby too. Cool. Anybody witness this magic show? Which would be even another twist on this. Other stuff. Anybody else have some exciting stuff to share? Going once. All right, let's get started then. So try to continue on with our plan to wrap things up by around 12 o'clock. I do want to take a short break though. I feel like although we could probably technically get through breakless, I kind of need the break just to sort of catch my breath a bit. So I'm going to go ahead and start our lecture today. It's already recording. And I'll start with just a quick update on the grades. The average for the midterm exam was 76, which is about average for where the average is the last few years. It's a similar type of exam that I've used in the past, not exactly the same questions. So this is about where I expect it to be. And typically the final exam grade goes up a little bit. And one of the reasons is that I shift the balance over to multiple choice questions, which tend to be a little bit easier in terms of how you answer them. So I don't know, or else maybe people expect what to be asked. So expect the final exam grade to probably be similar, and expect that if you weren't satisfied or weren't happy or pleased with your performance on the midterm, that you've got a lot of opportunity to sort of boost that a little bit for the final exam, which again tends to go up a little bit. We've got two more quizzes. One of them we just had, so you've sort of seen the mark for that quiz. We've got two more, and I'll drop the lowest one. Remember, if you've missed a quiz, you'll get a 0 for the one that you've missed, and then that will be dropped. And so whatever your lowest grade is, I'll only take the top 4. I'll have more to say about the final exam as we get closer, but the only downside is, of course, there is a bit of a gap between the final class and the exam. There's like 2 weeks, but that shouldn't make much of a difference. It gives you time to work on other stuff too. So before I continue on with what we're going to talk about today, any other questions? All right, so let's talk about context, motivation, and mood. So let me move this thing out of the way. So this is not the weather for today, but this could be very well the weather for tomorrow. And this is pretty much the weather that we had like for a lot of the terms. Let's see if I can turn some of these lights off here. That's a little better, I think. So how many of you enjoy driving in this kind of weather? Nobody. How many of you have recently driven in this kind of weather, in this kind of situation? And what do you normally experience in this situation? So what goes through your mind when you're driving bad weather, lots of ice, cars in front of you, cars behind you.
Or like tense.
You're tense. I'm very tense when I drive in this kind of situation. I had the worst, absolute worst driving experiences over the winter break. And I've been living here for over 20 years, and I lived in Buffalo, New York prior to that. So I'm not unfamiliar with bad driving. But the day after Christmas, which was Boxing Day, how many of you live in here, somewhere between here and the GTA? We had a huge ice storm. I was driving both of my adult daughters back to Toronto, along with one of their boyfriends and a cat. And we left the morning of the ice storm, and I thought, an ice storm is not great, but it doesn't seem like it's bad. By the time we got to Toronto, of course, it was a whiteout in Toronto, turned around and drove the whole way back through that ice storm, which was just absolutely the worst driving experience I'd ever had. Then the next day went camping up north and got stuck in a blizzard for 2 days. It was terrible. So this kind of driving is not a lot of fun. It's really tense. It's hard to focus on anything else. So imagine that you're driving to work or campus or your place of employment in this kind of situation. You're tense. You're stressed out a little bit. You're paying attention to the person in front of you. You're probably also paying attention to the person behind you in your rearview mirror, wondering if they're going to pay attention to you and slide into you from behind. So you got a lot of stuff going on, and you're putting all of your energy into focusing on driving. And then an hour later, you've got to be in a situation like this. Problem is, whenever I make something disappear on Zoom, Windows thinks that I'm in Zoom, and then it doesn't think that I'm in PowerPoint, and so I click, and it won't advance my PowerPoint slide. Now it thinks I'm in PowerPoint. So you're driving in a lot of stressful situation. You're paying attention. You're doing everything you can to focus, and then you've got to either give a lecture or be in a lecture. This is probably not going to be your best lecture. It's probably not going to be your best experience as a prof. It's probably not going to be your best experience as a student. And the reason is that you've spent the last hour stressed out. You spent the last hour inhibiting paying attention to anything else other than what your driving situation. Your cognitive control and your cognitive abilities are probably depleted. You're probably a little tired. You're probably not going to be at your best. This is an activity, whether you're the prof or the student, this is an activity that requires also a lot of attention. And so you're drawing on the same resources, this idea of inhibitory control, ignoring things that don't matter and focusing on something that does, and especially something that's kind of cognitively demanding, whether it's driving or lecturing. These are two really different experiences, but they have something in common. They require cognitive control. Or suppose you're driving in the front as a parent, and you have children in the back fighting and making a lot of noise. Now, these aren't my kids. This is just a random image that I searched on for Google image search for kids fighting in the back seat. And this is what comes up. But how many of you have been in this situation, either as the driver or as the passenger in a situation like this? It's not uncommon, right? And if you're the passenger in a situation like this and you're driving, oftentimes your parents probably get a little frazzled too. In fact, arguably, this is possibly worse than winter driving because you've got a lot of noise and chaos behind you. But as the driver, you also need to pay attention to what's in front of you. You need to pay attention to cars around you. It's not easy. It's a cognitively demanding task. Driving itself isn't necessarily all that cognitively demanding. It can be automated, but it can't be automated very easily if you're spending a lot of energy ignoring all of the chaos behind you. So you spend an hour driving your kids to school, then you get to work, and the next thing you need to do is really detailed science. Again, there's a possibility that this will suffer. Your performance may suffer because of the context. So in both of these cases, what do you think is the context and why is the context affecting your performance? So why would driving with kids fighting behind you potentially affect your performance as a scientist carrying out some detailed work?
It like uses your cognitive resources, so you have like less to like pull out.
It kind of, yeah. So if you didn't hear the answer, both of these tasks draw on cognitive resources, and in particular, cognitive control. And that's what today's lecture is mostly about, is all of the different ways that situations affect your cognitive abilities. And one of the things that's going to end up being a common denominator is cognitive control, executive control, the ability to continue to focus on something that's important, or continue to focus on what you're motivated to accomplish. So in both of these cases, you're motivated to drive well, and you're also motivated to carry out your job as a scientist really well. But in the second case, carrying out your job as a scientist, some of your cognitive control and your executive control may be somewhat depleted because of the drive that came before. Okay, so all of this works into what we've already been talking about for the last few weeks, and really for the whole class, is this idea of two ways of thinking, a fast way and a slow way. So I want to spend the next 10 minutes talking about thinking fast and slow. Then we'll come back to the idea of inhibitory control. The reason inhibitory control and cognitive control is important for this is that if these two systems are working together in parallel, and they're working together in parallel to help you make decisions, solve problems, etc. But if one of these systems provides a different answer or a different solution or a different set of recommended behaviors, you sometimes need to step back and have the existing executive control or cognitive control to be able to determine which of those two possible sets of behaviors is the right one. In other words, if system 2 is slower, reason-based, serial and deliberate, and can override system 1, you need to have the available resources to make that decision, and you need to have the available resources to inhibit the answer coming from system 1. So if you know that system 1 is mostly right, but sometimes isn't, you need to have the existing control to be able to make that determination. So we've already gone through some of this. This is a little bit of review, but essentially you've got a fast, high capacity parallel system. And a parallel system in cognition and cognitive science means that it can do lots of things simultaneously in parallel. It accomplishes a lot of different goals without you needing to think about it. It's non-conscious. It's independent of your cognitive ability. It's automatic and it's associative. By automatic, that just means that most of these processes, or many of these processes, happen without you even needing to initiate. Many of your these heuristics that we've talked about, whether these heuristics are availability or representativeness, they happen automatically. That's one of the messages I think we've been trying to focus on in a lot of our each individual class, is that memory retrieval happens without you trying. Using concepts to make inductions often happens without you trying to do anything. It's a natural consequence. So these happen automatically, whereas this system 2, this reflective process, requires more effort. That's the system that would likely you would rely on to carry on complex problem-solving behaviors, or to engage in reasoning tasks that require more than retrieving an answer. This is the system that would allow you to override a belief bias, to be able to do a reasoning problem without having to rely on the answer that first and most quickly comes to mind. So we've talked about a lot of these biases, a lot of these cognitive heuristics already. Let's look at them all together within the context of system 1 and system 2, and also think about the context of cognitive inhibition and cognitive control, the role of cognitive inhibition in each of these. So anchoring is a common heuristic that anchors your perceptual judgment, anchors your memory retrieval, based on something that you've initially perceived. So anchoring is a judgment on a common reference point or a highly salient piece of information. So for example, if you're given the option to donate money, and lots of us are often given the opportunity to donate money, whether it's through a charity, a mailer, a request, you got to start somewhere. So if you're asking someone to donate money, you might want to give them a reference point because you don't really know where to start. If you give them the option to start at 20, they're going to donate more than if you give them the option to start at 1. You see this all the time in point of sale tips, right? So how many of you sometimes are, I mean, I'm certainly a little perplexed as to why point of sale tipping machines often start at 18%. And I'm not talking about servers at a restaurant. I'm usually just talking about point of sale tips at things like a counter service. So Starbucks, for example, where you have the opportunity to give a tip for service, knowing that the employee is already making minimum wage or above minimum wage. And the tip may start at 18%. You can give less, you can give zero. But when the options presented to you are 18, 20, 25, and 30, you might feel compelled to pick one of them. That's an anchoring effect. You can give more or less, but you're anchored by the choices that are presented to you. That activates a lot of other things. It activates memory retrieval. It activates schemas for being able to give tips. And it also is fast, right? It's the fastest thing to do. You can come up with other possible gratuities, but the fastest thing to do is to pick one that's given to you directly, 15%, 18%. So that's an anchoring effect. It's a way to save cognitive resources. Availability is also, this is one we've talked about quite a lot. This is also a way to save your cognitive resources. You can make a decision or come up with a set of behaviors based on what's most available, requires less effort. Availability is basing a judgment on the information that's most available, most easily accessed. System one bases judgments on the information that is easiest to retrieve and reduces the cognitive demands. So both of these that we've talked about, anchoring and availability, have to do with reducing cognitive demands. Confirmation bias, we talked about last week. Tendency to seek information that confirms. This also reduces cognitive processing by reducing the number of options that you need to consider. So all of these are doing something in common. They're reducing the cognitive demands. This multiple systems, two systems approach to thinking suggests that we will often default to the system that reduces cognitive demands. If one of them is automatic, happens outside of consciousness, and works quickly, that's the one that we're often going to default to. Framing effects we're going to talk about in next week when we talk about decision making. Framing effects occur when a context around a judgment or a decision affects how that decision is made. So framing things as a loss or a gain changes the way in which you make a decision. Recency bias, this is the tendency to base judgments and decisions on more recent examples. Related to availability, it means that the most available thing is also the most recent thing. And we do have a pretty clear tendency to prefer things that happened recently. We often don't think about things that happened a long time ago or examples that happened a long time ago. The more recent ones are more available in memory. Representativeness is the tendency to treat individual members as representative of an entire class. All of these, what they have in common is when you use a heuristic, you're using a cognitive approach that is adaptive to reduce the amount of effort that you need to spend on a task. So when we refer to these as biases, they're only a bias it's a bias because it's a preference. And it's only a bad bias, and by bad I just mean suboptimal, if it results in decisions that are less optimal for your outcome, if it results in the wrong decision. Otherwise, this is a pretty adaptive way to behave. You may make some mistakes sometimes, but you're also going to use fewer resources. And all organisms go through life trying to figure out how to get by using the fewest amount of resources possible. Does that all make sense to everybody? So this is all some review. So one of the things that they have in common, the first examples that we did with resource depletion and the second set of examples with system one and system two and biases, is that they depend on some degree of cognitive flexibility and some degree of inhibitory control. Inhibitory control is necessary if you're navigating between multiple outcomes. If you're navigating between multiple possible solutions to a problem, multiple decisions that you might be able to make, you may need to inhibit the one that seems easier. Maybe you want to be able to consider alternatives. One of the easiest ways to see this is in this sort of classic example. You're all familiar with marshmallow tests, I assume, right? This is something that's pretty common, sort of pop culture psychology. So who can describe a marshmallow test before we watch a short video and then go through the original experiment. What does it mean what is the marshmallow test example telling?
So it's basically like delaying gratification in the sense where the researcher leaves the child in a room alone for
Yeah.
a brief amount of time with one marshmallow and says, you could either have this now or you could wait till I come back and have two. And so to kind of see if like they're kind of grasping that instant gratification or if they're waiting to get a better reward.
Right. So the canonical experiment, there's a lot of different variants of this, and we'll talk about Walter Mischel's original experiments in a few slides. But there's a lot of different versions of this. But the one that most of us are most familiar with is the one that you described, which is a participant, usually a child, is sort of faced with a decision, faced with a choice of instant gratification now, of a smaller kind, and delayed gratification, which results in a larger reward. And what you're trying to measure is, can the participant, can the child delay their gratification? What does delayed gratification have to do with inhibitory control? Well, delayed gratification is inhibiting the tendency to seek the initial reward, to seek the easiest possible outcome. And there are some other angles to that, but let's watch this short video. We can watch this whether the sound works or not, unlike the one that we had last week. This one works actually kind of well without the sound. Oh, but we have the sound this time. Okay, so let me just make this bigger. Let's full screen it. And you already know this example, so this should be really straightforward. But really, this is a non-scientific experiment. This particular video appears to just be a demonstration of a marshmallow experiment. It seems to have been produced by a large Christian church, which is probably going to tell you to, I don't know, avoid sin or something like that. But the example is good. It's a perfectly good example of how this works. And what I want you to notice, we're going to stop it a few times. I want to point out a couple of particular things about the kids in this video. This is not scientifically done. There's no experiment. And
You can either, and I'll give you another one if you wait, or you can eat it now. I'll give you another, so you know. But stay in the chair. Okay, all right.
so they got the basic instruction, right? They can wait and get two. One of the things you notice when you watch these kids is that, and how many of you have studied developmental psychology or are interested in developmental psychology? So one of the things you'll notice with kids is that they're not fully developed, right? That's why they call it developmental psychology. We're studying how kids develop. We're studying how cognitive control develops, and young kids have less well-developed cognitive control because their prefrontal cortex isn't fully developed until they're around 20. And that's where most of these behaviors are able to be carried out. So one of the things that happens, you'll notice, is as they wait a little bit longer, they go through a series of behaviors. Particularly, they move around a lot. And one possibility is that if you're using some of your cognitive control, your inhibitory control, to not eat the marshmallow, there's less of that inhibitory control to focus on, or to be left over for inhibiting your other movements. And so the more you focus on avoiding the marshmallow, you can't control your other movements. So their hands start to move, they start to fidget more, they keep reaching for the marshmallow. So there's a lot of embodied cognition going on. You can see the desire in their actions as they grasp towards the object, but then pull their hand back. So a physical, literal embodiment of inhibitory control. They inhibit themselves from eating the marshmallow. It's not just a mental thing, it's a physical thing as well. And so you'll see them physically acting out the process of cognitive control and inhibitory control. Some kids develop a strategy, which we'll talk about in the next slide, of not looking at the reward. But this particular child, while not looking at it, sort of fondles the marshmallow a little bit. So he knows it's there, but he's clearly deliberately not looking at it. He's trying to entertain himself in a different way by clicking his fingers.
So that-
Again, trying to entertain themselves with other actions. Obviously, younger kids, this is a developmental process, have developed even less cognitive control. And so you'll see that the younger children are more likely to just ignore the instructions and just go ahead and eat it. Because, I mean, from their perspective, who knows if a second marshmallow is coming? He kissed the marshmallow.
All right, then I'll come back. Okay? So you can either eat it, or you can wait. There. Okay.
Following the instructions, you can eat it now or you can wait. I'll eat it now.
How did you do? Did you do good? You did? You want to eat it, and you, yeah, so, another. Okay, I, both. You need them.
I mean, I don't even want a marshmallow, one of them. But for kids, I guess this is sort of a treat, I suppose. Where do I go back? Okay, so let's go back to this. Stop it. Start it again. Okay, so you saw a couple of things. We tried to highlight them. Number one, there's clearly cognitive control and inhibitory control going on. Children need to inhibit. If they want to get the second marshmallow, they need to inhibit their desire to eat the first marshmallow. And what they demonstrated was a series of different strategies for inhibiting that behavior. Some of them fidgeted, others entertained themselves with, making sounds. Others kind of tried to test it a little bit. Others completely ignored it so that you didn't have to see the reward at all. And a subset of them just chose to eat the marshmallow right away. There's no right or wrong answer. So this isn't a paper that was published in 1972. This isn't the original one, but it's the original author that sort of discovered this phenomenon, or at least measured this phenomenon. People have always known about delayed gratification. Certainly it's not something that was discovered in 1972. But Walter Mischel was the first to measure it as a construct and to see how it mapped onto other cognitive abilities. And that's what's important here. So carried out a series of experiments on the cognitive and attentional mechanisms in delay of gratification. Why is this important for the psychology of thinking? Well, we're interested in how people develop this ability of inhibitory control and cognitive flexibility, and how different kinds of situations affect thinking. So let's go through a couple of slides that show some screenshots from the original paper here. First of all, this is what participants were told in the experiment. This is not dissimilar from what the video showed, but it's a little bit more scientifically controlled. Subjects assigned to 3 delay of gratification conditions. I'll talk about those in a minute. Removed a cake tin from behind a barrier and placed it on the table. Let's see what's under here. I bet it's a surprise. Oh boy, look at that, a marshmallow and a pretzel. Which would you like to eat? You can eat either the marshmallow or the pretzel. First off, you give the child a choice as to what they think is something that they would really like. I mean, you could get some kids who don't like marshmallows, so you give them a pretzel instead. You can get some kid who really don't like pretzels, they get the marshmallow. So they get to choose what they would really like. So you've now demonstrated and measured some ability to sort of prefer a particular treat. Oh, you know what? I have to go out of the room now. And if you wait until I come back by myself, then you can eat this one, the one you like. But if you don't want to wait, you can ring the bell and bring me back anytime you want. But if you ring the bell, then you can't have the one that you want, let's say the marshmallow. You have to eat the pretzel instead. Does that make sense? So it's a slight variant on what you saw. They choose the marshmallow that they like. They like the marshmallow. Experimenter has to leave. When they come back, you can eat the thing that you like. But if you ring the bell and bring them back, you get to eat the thing you don't like. So it means that you don't get as big of a reward. You get a reward either way. You get to eat something either way. But if you ring the bell and you don't last as long as the experimenter wants you to last, you have to eat the less desirable thing. So if you ring the bell and bring me back, you can't have the blank marshmallow, but you can have the other thing. And so they gave them a couple of different conditions. So one was overt distraction. So we'll see a whole summary table on the next slide that shows the results of several different kinds of experiments. But a couple of things I want you to pay attention to. Some cases they were given distractions where they were given something else to play with. They were given a slinky toy so that they could distract themselves from wanting to have the marshmallow. It makes time go a little faster, right? It gave them something to do. Sometimes they were given contingency instructions and thus waiting with the possibility of getting the preferred food if he waited long enough and less preferred objects. So that was the one that we just read. In other cases, they were left alone to play as long as they wanted. They placed the slinky on the floor. We'll see some other conditions in the next slide. So there were lots of different particular contingencies. They were also given some cognitive distractions. So these were things, you saw some of the kids act these out themselves spontaneously. Before leaving the room, the experimenter gave the subject instructions designed to encourage, oh, while I'm gone, can you think of anything that's fun to think of for as long as you want? You can think of something. I mean, that's really not very inspiring. Like, I'm not going to last very long if somebody says, here's something you like, you can't have it, but can you think of something fun to distract yourself? But they tried their best. So they gave them something else. You can sing songs or play with toys. That's fun. And then they leave. So they gave them either some physical distractions, some cognitive distractions. And here is a summary of some of the results. There's some other conditions on here I'll explain as well. So across a lot of different experiments, on the y-axis, the up and down axis, the higher number shows the longer you could wait. So we want to know how long can kids wait before they ring the bell? Can they last? When they're given no ideation and the rewards were available for attention, in other words, the marshmallow was right in front of them, they weren't given any kind of distracting task, they don't wait very long at all. They ring the bell right away. So very short waiting time when you can see the rewards and you're not given anything else to think about. In several experiments where they were given something fun to think about, they lasted longer. So those are like the kids that spontaneously entertained themselves with singing songs or dancing or doing whatever else it was. When they were asked to think about the reward and how good it would be when they got to have the reward, they didn't last as long because they were focused on the reward. When the rewards were not available for attention, in other words, the rewards were then taken away from their view, and they were either given nothing to think about, something fun to think about, or they were asked to again focus on the rewards. Focusing on the rewards shortened their waiting time. So you've got variability in waiting times, and it seems to be predicted by what your instructions are, seems to be predicted by the context. If the context focuses your attention on what you really want, you last only a few minutes. If the context focuses your attention on something else, and therefore not depleting your energy while you're trying to ignore that reward, you can last a little bit longer. You can last up to 15 minutes. 15 minutes sitting alone in a room with nothing else but a marshmallow and the instructions to think about something fun is an incredibly long time. I don't know how long you've ever had to wait in a situation like that, but it would be a lot longer than would be pleasant. So that's a long time to wait. So they've got some measure. And with this measure, you can now look at whether or not it corresponds to other more sophisticated cognitive abilities. Because really, we don't care that much about how long you can wait for a marshmallow. What we care about is your ability that we're measuring with this marshmallow task. This is a task to measure a cognitive construct. If we can measure something with this marshmallow task, does it correlate or predict other more important, interesting, and complicated behaviors? The answer is yes. And so in subsequent work, they asked many of the same participants. This is a developmental study. So in developmental research, you can often do what's called longitudinal research, right? You can study someone at time 1, and then 5 years or 10 years later, follow those participants up with additional research. And one of the ways they followed their participants up was to ask a couple of things. First of all, how well do they do academically when they take standardized tests? And secondly, how do their parents perceive their own ability to maintain their emotions, to maintain their cognitive ability? So this is predicting adolescent cognitive and self-regulatory competencies from preschool delay of gratification. In other words, kids who were in preschool who delayed gratification, we've asked them to come back into the lab and do other things, and now we're going to measure things with them. One of the things they asked was parents to fill out an adolescent coping questionnaire. And this was essentially asking parents to say, how well does my adolescent child cope with frustrations? Positive correlation would mean that there's a relationship. Negative significant correlation means the opposite kind of relationship. And what you might find is, so here's spontaneous ideation, rewards exposed. This is the condition that we saw in the video. And this is the one that tends to correlate with behaviors. Is your child likely to be sidetracked by minor setbacks? The more parents rated their child as being sidetracked, the less likely they were to have waited for that reward when they were preschool children. That's what the significant negative correlation means. So in other words, these kids were more likely to be frustrated as preschoolers, meaning that they rang the bell and brought the experimenter back in. They didn't wait as long. And as adolescents, their parents rate them as being more likely to be sidetracked, but also, how likely is your child to exhibit self-control in frustrating situations? Strong positive correlation with waiting time. And if you go down the list, you'll see lots of behaviors that are all around this construct of cognitive control. I can control what I'm thinking about. I can control how I behave in certain situations. And as we'll see in a few slides, I'm likely to be able to control reacting quickly or responding to a system 1 response when I might be able to take a little bit longer and respond using system 2. Does that make sense to everybody? Now, it doesn't mean that you're completely hopeless if you rang the bell early, because all of these, you'll notice that there are no significant or very few significant correlations with any of the other conditions. So once strategies are introduced, like you can think about something, if you're frustrated or if you want to wait a little bit longer, distract yourself by thinking about something else. Take your focus away from that marshmallow. Kids are able to last longer, and those correlations seem to disappear. So it suggests that any of these sort of straightforward interventions are mostly enough to be able to get kids to wait longer, possibly enough to be able to get them to exhibit self-control in frustrating situations. Does that seem clear to everybody? So you're not doomed if you couldn't wait for that marshmallow in preschool. It does also, in the same way, correlate with academic ability. So academic ability in this case is measured by Scholastic Aptitude Test, which is a standardized academic test in the United States. So in the US, if you want to go to university or college, you almost always have to take one of these standardized tests to be able to use for admission, in addition to your grades. And you can see that there are the same kind of relationships. In this same spontaneous ideation rewards exposed, higher verbal and quantitative test abilities correlate with longer waiting time. In other words, the kids who wait longer are the kids who also perform better on tests of academic ability. This should surprise no one. People who can study longer without being distracted are likely to get higher grades. People who can focus on their schoolwork a little bit longer are likely to be able to perform a little bit better. So one of the first things that should come to mind is that there's a difference in motivation. So with the marshmallow test video that we watched, some of the kids may have been motivated to receive a reward. In other words, they were reward focused. So the child who was shown at the very end, sort of perking up when the door opened up, like, man, I get 2 marshmallows now, may have been focused on receiving that reward. That's a promotion focus. That's a reward focused framework. They're thinking about what they might get later on. That requires a fair amount of prospective thinking. That requires you to think about what you're going to get. And it also means that you've got to think about it in a certain way, that I'm going to achieve something. There's another way to think about it, and that has to do with what you might lose. It's possible that some of the younger kids, or even some of the older kids who decided not to wait, maybe they're worried about that marshmallow disappearing. Those are both reasonable ways to approach the world. I want to get 2 marshmallows, or I want to prevent this 1 marshmallow from being taken away from me. It's right here now. Why shouldn't I eat this marshmallow right now? So for the next 15 to 20 minutes, I want to talk about motivation and thinking. How your motivational states, we're going to talk about a lot of different things: intrinsic motivation, extrinsic motivation, promotion and prevention motivation affect thinking ability. We'll end with an experiment on category learning, perceptual category learning, and then we'll take a short break. Does that seem straightforward to everyone? So personal motivation affects how well and how deeply you think. And you probably all know this, right? Many of you are motivated to achieve certain things, and you have an intrinsic motivation. Give me an example, a couple of examples. Give me some examples of things that you have that are what you want to do versus what you have to do. In other words, the difference between intrinsic motivation, I really like doing this, I really like to do this, I want to do this, versus extrinsic motivation. I am compelled by someone else outside of me to do this. So give me some examples from your own life of intrinsic and extrinsic.
Knowing you want to study, but also also wanting to check your phone.
So knowing you want to study, but also wanting to check your phone to be on there. Knowing you need to study, that's an extrinsic motivation, but it might also be intrinsic. There are sort of combinations of that there. So you're motivated to study because you want to do well. Checking your phone. What are the extrinsic and intrinsic aspects of checking your phone behavior? What's intrinsic about that? I mean, you like what's on your phone, probably, right? But what's extrinsic about that to some extent?
Maybe you might need to like check your messages and respond to certain people.
Maybe you need to check something and respond. So maybe there's a particular message you're waiting on. So that could be an extrinsic motivation. I mean, another possible extrinsic motivation is that the system, the entire system of the smartphone ecosystem is specifically designed to gather your attention, right? That there's an algorithm out there that's trying to find something that you'll spend a little bit more time looking at and deliver more of that content to you. That's intrinsic in the sense that you like to look at it, but it's also a little extrinsic in the sense that somebody over there at Meta, for example, or at TikTok decides that you'd like to see more of this. So there is a little bit of extrinsic. How about some other examples? Things that you have to do versus things that you want to do.
Be reading a book for fun versus having to do it for an English project.
So reading a book for fun versus having to read for assigned reading for a class. Perfectly good examples. And those are two different kinds of reading, right? Most of us enjoy reading stuff for fun, but it's not the same stuff that we're assigned to read for class. What are some other examples of something that's extrinsic and something that's intrinsic?
Like playing music and then doing taxes.
Playing music and doing your taxes. Those are really excellent examples. I finished my Canadian taxes this weekend, not only for me, but for my 2 adult children who still haven't figured out how to do it themselves. So I've done the family tax accountant job on Sundays. So good for me. It was an extrinsic motivation. You kind of have to do your taxes, right? Because there are penalties for not doing so. Playing music, on the other hand, you usually do that because you enjoy it, right? So there's intrinsic motivation. We're all full of things that we want to do, that we like to do. And ideally, you hope that some of the things that you like to do end up being things that are part of your adult life, right? It ends up being things that maybe you can even make a living out of, or at least incorporate into your professional life. It doesn't always work. It's perfectly reasonable to have a job that you actually don't like at all. You can do well enough and it pays you well enough that you can do the things you like to do as the rest of with the rest of your time. You don't have to have a job that corresponds to intrinsic motivation. Maybe you just do it for the money and then you enjoy all of your spare time. So all of these things play a role. We tend to spend more time on the things that we're intrinsically motivated to do, though, right? And we tend to put more effort in them because it seems more effortless. You don't have to force yourself to play music if you like playing music. You don't have to force yourself to check your phone if you like to check your phone. So a lot of things you don't have to force yourself to do, but sometimes you need a little bit more cognitive control to do things that require an extrinsic motivation. So it's driven by personal interest, curiosity, and enjoyment. Extrinsic is driven by grades, deadlines, obligation, and this is a really important one that we're going to talk more about, fear of failure. How many of you, and you don't need to raise your hands every time I say this, but think about it. Is your time here at Western, your time here in this class, even in this lecture today, this morning, is there sometimes a little bit of fear of failure there? I think for most of us, that's sometimes present academically. I've been a professor for over 20 years, and a large part of my day, at least research-wise, seems to be driven by a fear of failure. Because as an academic, as a scientist, you spend a lot of time getting your papers rejected, getting grants rejected, having people criticize what you do. Even if you get a paper accepted, you've got to go through a whole round of peer review, which is people telling you all the things that are wrong with your paper. And if your grant isn't funded, a lot of things that are wrong with your grant. There's a lot of fear of failure that most academics and scientists probably still carry around, even when they're really accomplished or experienced in what they do. So this never goes away, and this never goes away either. And so we're trying to figure out how this affects our thinking ability. So let's talk about some everyday examples, then let's talk about some specific examples. So these were the ones that all of us came up with. Reading for pleasure, that was one that came up. Playing music, hobbies, doing magic, for example. I'm assuming that's something that is intrinsically motivated. You're not doing magic out of fear. That's a different kind of magic, I would assume. It usually has high effort, deep engagement, willingness to persist. But extrinsic are things which we all mentioned. Completing assigned readings, meeting deadlines, studying to avoid a poor grade. So let's think about that idea. I want to bring two ideas together. First, the idea of the children who were either focused on getting the reward later versus preventing that marshmallow from disappearing in the first place. So that's prevention and promotion. Then I want you to think about this in the context of the goals that we talked about. Your intrinsic motivation tends to be promotion focus. You tend to focus on getting better at playing the guitar. You might want to focus at getting better at doing a particular magic trick or getting better at investing your money so that you can increase the size of your investment portfolio if that's something that you do not out of obligation, but because you enjoy investing money. Those are all focused on prevention as opposed to other things like showing up for a class so that you don't miss some information. That's focused on prevention. Or doing your job in a certain way so that you don't get fired. That's focused on prevention. And both of those involve some extrinsic and intrinsic motivational aspects. So promotion focused, 2 ways to achieve a goal. Let's talk about it academically, and then let's talk about it employment based. Promotion focused student envisions success, maybe is eager, reads extra material. Do you know anybody who reads extra material because they really want to achieve something? Maybe you do this. Maybe you know somebody who does this. However, a promotion-focused student, somebody who wants to, get better, might also envision failure because they don't do enough extra work. In other words, when they think about not achieving something, they think about it because they're thinking about what they didn't do to achieve promotion. And so in this case, you may not achieve the goal because there's a mismatch between the way in which you've approached things, which is envisioning failure, and the kind of person you are. As a promotion-focused personality, promotion-focused framework, you're thinking about achieving. And if you're in a particular job, student experience, or set of experiences which match with your preferences, in other words, you are promotion-focused, and the situation you're in also rewards promotion focus, you're more likely to achieve your goal. And this is known as regulatory fit. In other words, your approach to life, promotion focus to life, matches with the context and the situation that you happen to be. The way you choose behaviors and act matches with the rewards of the world that you're living in. And you can see the same kind of promotion mismatch and match even for someone who is prevention focused. Because sometimes that's a good way to go through life as well. Last couple of years ago, when Elon Musk bought Twitter before they renamed it X. So it was still called Twitter. Elon Musk purchased the company, made it a private company, and then quickly started reducing the workforce. And one of the things that I remember about that, I don't have a Twitter or an X account now, but I did many years ago. And one of the things I remember about that time for that company, reading about employees, is that they were all worried they were going to lose their job. So what quickly changed from a promotion focus, in other words, we like working at Twitter. We like rolling out new features. We like rolling out new aspects to the product and new ways to engage, became a culture of we might get fired because we can't do a certain thing. We might lose our job because of something else. And so they quickly found themselves in a prevention-focused world. Many of them may have been promotion-focused, but they were then in a prevention focus. They did not want to lose their job. They needed to adhere to guidelines that were set by the employer more strictly. Individuals who had that prevention focus goal might have been able to stay engaged in the company because it's something that worked well with their approach to life. In other words, prevention or promotion focus can allow for success as long as it matches with the environment. As humans, we're capable of both. Some of us may show a preference for one or the other. Does that make sense? So we've got prevention and promotion focus at the individual level, and prevention and promotion focus at the contextual or task level. So regulatory focus is how you approach the world. So these might mean goals like approaching desirable states that you want to move towards, things that you want to achieve, and avoidance, undesirable states that you want to avoid. So these are things that we're faced with all the time. All of us want to do well in our classes, and we also don't want to fail. So academics usually requires a combination of those two things, right? You want to promote, but you also you want to prevent failure. You want to approach certain things, and you want to avoid other things. And these interact with this cognitive style, which is the regulatory focus that we've been talking about. A promotion focus is a focus on achievement of desired outcomes and possible gains and non-gains in the environment. And by non-gains, I specifically mean not worrying about whether you lose, but just, is this something I can gain or not something I can? That's a promotion focus. Prevention focus is usually focused on the losses side of the equation. Rather than focusing on gains and non-gains, you focus on losses and non-losses. And you can see how one of these is kind of an optimistic way of looking at things. I'm either going to gain or not. And one of them seems a little more pessimistic. I'm either going to lose or just not lose. So for some of these people, winning is just not losing. Does that make sense? And these are both sometimes useful approaches to how you think about it. So let's look at another few examples, and we're going to talk about an experiment that tries to manipulate these things specifically. Suppose you're applying for a job, which is something that, how many of you are fourth-year students? I'm assuming that many of you might also be at some point considering full-time employment rather than just summer job. Those of you that are third-year students presumably are looking for summer employment of some kind. So this is something that's really important when you're in your 20s. You want to find sometimes short-term work, but you also want to find long-term career success, right? So you can apply for a job, and nobody finds this situation pleasant, right? Job interviews can be stressful because there's something on the line, but you can approach them in two ways. One, if you have a promotion focus, you try to impress that person. How many of you have applied for a job and you try to impress the person that's interviewing you? You try to impress them with your resume, you try to impress them with your CV and your cover letter, and then you meet them in person and you try to impress them. Have you ever been in a situation where you feel like this is not somebody who likes to try to be impressed and that you're going overboard and you sort of feel a little cringy afterwards because you're like, why did I say that? I tried too hard. But if you have a promotion focus, that's a normal thing to do. That's a normal thing for most of us to do when we're trying to get a job, is to try to promote ourselves. You try to impress the person. You strive to present yourself in the best way possible by drawing attention to the things that you can do if you succeed, and what you gain is being offered the job. And you might continue in this role once you're offered the job. But you could also approach employment with a prevention focus. Suppose you already have the job, and these are the employees that were at Twitter when Elon Musk bought it, right? So they already have this job. They're happy with their job, but now there's a lot of competition. The employer has set up a competitive environment where some jobs are going to be lost. You're going to succeed in this environment. You have to adopt a different strategy and a different framework. You don't want to draw attention to things. In fact, drawing attention to all the things you can do might not help, because you don't know if those things are in the employer's mindset. What you want to do is prevent yourself from making mistakes. In other words, you want to avoid the loss. So you focus on losses and non-losses rather than promotion. Does this make sense to everybody? I might just close that door because just going to start up again as soon as I get here. So let's talk about regulatory fit. We'll do this for about 10 minutes. We'll finish the experiment, and then I feel like this is a day when we definitely probably need a short break in between. So we'll get through this experiment, take a break, and then finish up with some other interesting experiments. So regulatory fit is when your method of goal pursuit, prevention or promotion, matches your particular focus. So your job matches your personality might be one way to say that. Or the situation that you're in matches your approach to how you want to achieve things. And when you're in a state of regulatory fit, research suggests that you have more cognitive flexibility. You're actually better able to achieve things. It's not just that promotion is good or that prevention is good. It's that you have to have a match between your regulatory focus and the regulatory focus of the task. So in this experiment, I'll go through this in as much detail as I can. A couple of the experiments are just a little bit complex in terms of the way the stimulus set is set up. So if anything doesn't seem clear, stop me and I'll start over again. So what Todd Maddox and colleagues did is that they created a perceptual task that either benefited from cognitive flexibility or did not benefit from cognitive flexibility. So what that means is that if you have a little bit more flexibility in how you can approach things, you can consider multiple perspectives. In one version of the task, that helps you achieve more reward. In the other version of the task, that additional flexibility actually makes things worse. And you'll see what I mean in just a minute. So we've got a task that either rewards flexibility or not, and then they can ask participants to either adopt a promotion or a prevention focus, and then they can change the task to either focus on giving you rewards or making losses avoidable. So they can manipulate regulatory fit in different kinds of tasks. Here's how they set up the predictions for their experiment. They've got three experiments. We'll talk about each one of them, but it's an interaction between the reward structure of the task, one that focuses on gains or one that focuses on losses, and the situational focus of the participant, one that is promotion and prevention. And what they predict is better performance in experiment one when there's a match: gain, promotion, loss, prevention. Because in experiment one, cognitive flexibility is advantageous to your performance. So this is a case where the match is good for you. In the second two experiments, they created a different version of the perceptual task in which flexibility was disadvantageous, and that allowed them to make the opposite prediction, which gives them sort of a behavioral double dissociation, where they predict better performance for a mismatch, which is kind of hard to think about a case where your approach to life does not match with the task in front of you, and somehow it's actually better. But there are some cases, as we'll see, where that's actually true. So in experiment one, flexibility helps in the rule discovery process. In experiment 2 and 3, flexibility hurts if the person is trying to discover a rule. Because in experiments 2 and 3, gradual learning is actually the better strategy. If you're focusing on trying to find a rule, you're actually going to adopt the wrong strategy. Here's how they set up the experiment. So imagine in three-dimensional space, specific stimulus, we'll see them on the next slide, that have three different variables: the position on the screen, the orientation of a line, so that could be either tilted forwards or backwards, and the length of the line. It's really boring stimuli to look at. It's a line of a certain length, of a certain orientation, and a certain location in space. It doesn't have any meaning, but your job in the experiment is to figure out how to call some of these, label some of them as members of category 1 and others as members of category 2. So at first, they all kind of look the same. Here's a bunch of things that have some variability in the tilt, the position, and the length of a line. But I have to figure out how to label some of them as being group 1 and label others as being group 2. In the first experiment, they asked their participants to learn a category structure where some of the things that have a certain orientation, length, and position are all called category 1, and a subset of them that occupy one particular region of perceptual space are called category 2. The reason that this is something that benefits from flexibility is that you need to figure out which of these three dimensions you need to pay attention to formulate a rule to help you classify things, such that you might say, you might describe it verbally with this boundary here, that things that are a certain length and a certain orientation are labeled as category 1, and everything else is labeled as category 2. Does that sound somewhat straightforward? It'll be a little clearer in the next few examples. Yeah.
Like for each one, they're giving like a bunch of like words that have these different aspects as part of them.
In each trial of the experiment, you just see the shape on the screen and you make a response and you get feedback, which you'll see on the next slide. But what a lot of research in this area, and we're actually going to keep with this particular paradigm after the break, because I'm going to talk about some of my research that uses a similar paradigm. When you're learning to describe the stimuli verbally, and learning to apply the rule, you tend to verbalize the rule based on the perceptual dimensions. In this case, flexibility helps because the rule can be described verbally. In this case, the rule, which is one that incorporates all three dimensions, can't be described verbally. It's a rule, it's a boundary in perceptual space, but it's not one that you can describe with language very easily. And what a lot of research suggests is that people can learn this, but they learn it through gradual stimulus response association, which is more of a system one response. It is not something that requires verbal ability. And in this case, flexibility hurts. And the reason flexibility hurts is that in an experiment like this, most of us are going to try to use our verbal processes to find a rule, but there is no verbalizable rule. So if you spend a lot of time trying to find a rule, you will fail in this particular case because each individual rule operates at chance. So this would be a case where the flexibility to switch from one rule to the next is actually going to mean that you're going to take longer to acquire the category structure. What that would mean is that in this case, performance should be better in the regulatory fit condition. When there's a boundary, a perceptual boundary that can be described verbally by a rule, performance should be better when your focus matches the task. Performance will be better when there's a mismatch in the case where there is no verbalizable perceptual boundary. So here's how they manipulated situational focus. Participants in the situation promotion focus were told they could earn entry into a drawing if they exceeded a performance criterion. In other words, they're not in the drawing yet, but they could get into the drawing if they get past a certain threshold. In other words, if you achieve enough, you can win $50. Participants in the situational focus were given the entry and told they could only keep it if they exceeded the same performance criteria. So you can see the difference. In one case, you don't have the entry into the drawing and you have to earn it. In the other case, you get it and you have to keep it. So one focus requires you to get something. The other focus requires you to keep something. Then they manipulated the task focus to be gain or loss in a really straightforward way. By the way, these are the stimuli that they had to classify. Lines of a certain length, of a certain orientation, tilted in a certain location in a box. So it's very difficult to get any meaning out of this, but you can describe all of these features verbally. Tilted to the right, tilted to the left, long or short, move to the left, move to the right. You make a response and you just get feedback, correct or incorrect. And in the gain version, you watch a counter go up until you get to that criterion that lets you either earn the reward or keep the reward. In the loss version, you start at the top and you watch your errors go down. So every time you make a mistake, you lose points. So you can see that they've got situational focus. You get to earn a drawing versus keep a drawing. And they've got situational gain and loss. You either gain points or you lose points. And what they're predicting is that if you're in a promotion focus, you're going to be more creative and more flexible when you're trying to gain points. If you're in a prevention focus, you're going to be better able to think through this task if you're avoiding losing points. That's going to be the match. The mismatch is going to be the other two conditions. Does that seem straightforward? And what they found was the following. So let me show you the next few slides and then we'll take a break. In the first experiment, remember, flexibility is advantageous. There's a rule that they can describe and what they've predicted is that flexibility will be advantageous in this case. And what they found is that the promotion focus helps in the gains version. So these are promotion-focused participants here in a gain task. More of them reach the criterion, and their performance proportion correct across the blocks is higher in the promotion focus than in the prevention focus. So when you're in a gains version of the task, you do better when you're trying to earn entry into a drawing. When you're in the loss version of the task, mathematically exactly the same stimuli, same task, except now you're trying to avoid losing points. Those participants do better when they're asked to adopt a prevention framework. So if the world sets you up to focus on losses, you're better if your situational focus is one that's prevention-based. More of these participants reach the criterion, and their performance across blocks is significantly higher. In the second experiment, there's one extra additional angle here. In some cases, the criterion wasn't achievable. So if we look at this plot here, what you see is that for the unattainable goals, prevention focus exceeded promotion focus for the unattainable but not for the attainable goals. This was all a gains task in this case. So promotion focus created a state of regulatory fit, making it more difficult to achieve the unattainable goal. Does that seem straightforward? Or is that a little bit? Yes.
Explain what, like the attainable, unattainable.
So in this case, the goal was unattainable in the sense that the task structure would not allow you to have enough points to be able to actually get the criteria. So they created a task where no matter how good you were unable to reach that criterion. This is always a Gainsbury task. So for both of, yeah.
So for the like part where there's like no right answer, the idea that since they couldn't actually answer it right, like guessing more times make them go down more.
So what seems to be the case is that if it's an unattainable goal, you're in a gains-focused task, and you're in a state of regulatory fit. In other words, the task is giving you gains, and you're trying to achieve something that you actually can't achieve. You spend more time trying to find a rule that isn't there. And so it reduces their performance. So the key thing seems to be here is that when there's a mismatch, focusing on gains that you're not going to achieve makes your performance a little worse. Does that make sense? So mismatch is actually better in this case. You're better off performing, your performance is better in a task when you're not exactly sure what to do. Because in this particular case, you're able to achieve the performance, you're going to get better performance through stimulus response association that happens naturally and automatic. So this is a task where our verbal rule doesn't work anyway. I can start up with this after the break, if that would help. Because after this, I was going to move into mood and thinking, but it does, I feel like one extra minute on this slide would help, but let's take a break and let's continue with this. It's 10:45, so 10-minute break. We're going to come back right on this one. I'll start back with this, and then we'll go into mood and thinking and cognitive resource depletion and thinking.
I kind of left it the easy route.
Mine, like that was changed. She emailed me, but about like.
But it looks like everyone's back for the break. So
I have no.
why don't we continue?
Motion focus, tell yourself.
Now, I do recognize the time change. Probably if you're like me, you didn't sleep as well last night as you might have. I certainly did not. I looked at my sleep tracker on my Apple Health device, and the last 2 nights, I got a low sleep score. A little better last night than the night before. So if you're struggling to stay awake, if that describes you, it describes me as well. I too am struggling to stay awake. So let me back up a little bit and try to explain the last piece of this experiment. And then I think the next ones will actually be a little easier to go through. So where we ended was the experiment 2 and 3. Which suggested that regulatory mismatch actually makes things a little bit better. And I did notice maybe just a little bit of confusion on this point. And this is a little bit confusing because it's kind of backwards from what we had just been talking about. So the experiments make opposite predictions. So in the first experiment, let me back up a few slides here. So that I can explain this a little better. So in the first experiment, participants learned this particular arrangement of stimuli, which can be learned by a verbalizable rule. A verbalizable rule in perceptual category learning also assumes that the participant needs to go through a hypothesis testing process. You need to focus on individual features. You need to test out rules, pay attention to whether or not those rules are increasing your performance, and if not, switch to a different rule, and sometimes combine the rules. Having cognitive flexibility really helps in that case because you can try different things and you can engage in inhibitory process to ignore the features and rules that aren't working. Experiment 2 and 3, the ones that we ended on, used a different category structure altogether. So the stimuli they had to learn to classify were arranged in perceptual space such that a verbalizable rule wouldn't work. If you are engaged in hypothesis testing, and if you have some degree of cognitive flexibility, you're likely going to go through a lot of rules. But what you'll find is that none of them work. There are no workable rules in this case. So in the final experiment, which I'm going to move forward to, this is the category structure that participants were learning. It was the case where rules aren't usable. Anybody who tests a lot of rules and tests a lot of hypotheses is going to struggle to learn the category structure. So when we focused on the first experiment, participants in the gain version where there was a match did better, and participants in the loss version who adopted a prevention focus did better. So regulatory fit improved performance. In the second experiment, which relied on a category structure for which there was no verbalizable rule, relied on a gains version of the task, and introduced an additional aspect, which was an unattainable goal, meaning that there weren't enough available points to earn to be able to get the drawing. Everybody gets the drawing at the end, but you couldn't achieve the goal that you were trying to achieve. And what they determined was that in the unattainable condition, where the experiment goes on long enough that you can't attain the goal, and the number of error signals makes it impossible for you to attain the goal, promotion focus, trying to attain the goal, for a category structure that doesn't benefit from cognitive flexibility, made the performance more difficult. And the suggestion is the participants were trying rules and testing hypotheses that didn't work. The extra flexibility in the fit actually worked against these participants. They did better if they just kind of gave up and just learned stimulus response association instead. And that seems to be the explanation for this performance disparity. Does that seem a little bit more clearer after the break? Good. Let's continue. So let's talk now about mood and thinking, being in a good mood or a bad mood, angry, sad, etc. Cognition and emotion are often separate. So we've been thinking about cognition, system 1 and system 2, as not really including much about mood and affect at all. And what we've talked about with respect to system 2 thinking is that it's kind of rational thought. We're going to talk about rational decision making next week. And most of this is supposed to be not influenced by your mood, right? If you're a good rational decision maker, you shouldn't be swayed by your mood, but that's unrealistic. Mood shapes how you think. I mean, most of us know this, right? No matter how much we might want to be rational agents, we're often irrational. If you're in a good mood, you're going to perform differently in different kinds of tasks than if you're in a bad mood. And just like with regulatory fit and focus, it depends on the task and it depends on the mood. Sometimes being in a good mood helps. Being in a good mood can help in cases where you need to have some additional cognitive flexibility. Sometimes being in an angry mood can help. Have you ever had experiences where you're really angry at something, but you actually do better? In cases where focusing on something very specific, you can sometimes do better if you're in kind of an angry mood. Being in a sad mood doesn't necessarily help because it tends to reduce your motivation. So there are interactions with motivation as well. For the same person, given the same problem, you might perform differently depending on your mood state. And understanding these effects goes looking beyond simple positive and negative distinctions. So I'm going to have a few slides on distinguishing between different kinds of mood. And then I'm going to talk about a little bit of research looking at negative mood, and then some research looking at positive mood and cognition. Negative mood, there seems to be several different ways to describe how negative mood might affect your cognition. Sadness and anger, first of all, are a difference in arousal. They're both negative moods, but one is a high arousal negative mood, that's anger, versus one is a low arousal negative mood, which is sadness. They're both negative, but they differ in terms of their intensity and their arousal state. What we'll see on some of the research I'll show you in a little bit is that sadness might reduce motivation and broaden attentional focus. The reduced motivation probably makes sense. If you're feeling kind of sad and down about things, you're less likely to try to achieve things. But it also suggests that your attentional scope broadens as a result because it requires effort to focus on a specific feature. Sadness might broaden your attention to many features. Angry mood tends to narrow attentional focus. Positive mood might increase flexibility in general. Not all negative moods affect cognition in the same thing. And that's because negative mood differ in terms of valence, which is the positive negative mood, differ in terms of valence, positive, negative, and arousal. Anger, which is negative and high, also affects your motivational intensity because typically you're angry for a reason. You're angry because there might be something that's making you angry. Maybe you're aware. From an evolutionary perspective, anger might also correspond to trying to eliminate the thing that's making you angry. It tends to be a signal that your cognitive system can use to get rid of the causal factor. So focusing narrowly on something can be beneficial. Something is making you angry. I want to know what's making me angry, so I want to eliminate the thing that's making me angry. The mood in this case is a really good signal. Sadness and depression are negative, but they're low in motivational intensity, probably because a goal is not present. So this interacts with your motivational. Anger tends to narrow attentional focus because you zoom in on the source of the threat. This might be for evolutionary reasons, but it's also for cognitive and achievement-related reasons. If something's making you angry in a personal relationship, for example, how many of you, you don't have to raise your hand. How many have been in a personal relationship with a romantic partner and something about them makes you angry? Well, you probably want to focus on that thing that makes you angry. And maybe you pay attention to that thing that makes you angry. Maybe you want to reduce that thing, maybe not throwing the whole man away, but perhaps maybe you want to focus on the one thing that's making you angry. Maybe it's your fault. Maybe there's something about the way in which you're perceiving a person's actions that makes you angry. But anger is useful. It helps you focus on the thing that is the source of your anger, which might ultimately be a threat. Sad mood broadens attentional focus. Attention becomes unfocused and diffuse. And so what we'll see on the next slide or two is that when you're asked to classify stimuli, depending on the mood state that you're in, you can interpret the same objects differently. What does it mean for cognition? Well, narrow focus helps with tasks with sustained attention, but it impairs big picture thinking. You can focus for longer when you're angry. Anger can motivate you to achieve something. And you probably all are familiar with those kinds of situations when you're angry at something like, oh, I don't know, OSAP. Maybe that will focus your attention on something because you're angry about it, right? And so it allows for your motivation to be sustained. Sadness doesn't do this. Valence alone does not predict the effect of cognition. The valence and the intensity of the mood seems to matter. When we're studying mood and cognition, we're not usually studying people's natural mood state because we have to have some experimental control. I mean, you can ask people who are naturally angry about something to perform a task, or naturally sad or naturally happy, but mostly in a lab, we want to induce their moods. And so what we're going to study for the next 3 or 4 experiments are going to use something called a mood induction procedure. And these vary in terms of how they work. But usually they try to standardize putting you in a particular mood state. One of the things that's been discovered is that you can induce a positive mood. You can put people in a good mood, right? There's probably a reason why I like to start class with asking for positive stories or positive events or happy events or funny events. It's kind of good to be in a good mood when you're at the beginning of class. The last thing I want is for all of you to be in an angry mood at the beginning of this class. That's not going to be very beneficial. Or a sad mood where you just kind of diffuse. So for a class like this, where you might want to have some flexibility about how you think about things, being in a good mood is a good thing. We'll see that experimentally. So that's an example of mood induction. But mood induction experiments tend to be fairly regularized. But negative moods don't seem to last as long in a lot of cognitive tasks. Why is that? Well, in a lot of cases, what we'll see is that you put people into a mood artificially. It's not really a very long-lasting mood, but if you put somebody into a particular mood and then you ask them to do something, if they're doing that thing and getting some feedback, that tends to perpetuate a positive mood, but it also tends to reduce a negative mood. So if I put you in a good mood and then I ask you to learn something, a memory task or a problem-solving task, and then you solve the problem, you're in better mood now because you solved the problem. If I put you in a negative mood, ask you to solve a problem and you solve the problem, well, now it's going to sort of work against the negative mood. So they don't last very long. Here's a sort of a meta-analysis or sort of a large analysis that was carried out by one of the labs here at Western, not my lab, but David Dozwa's lab, which studies mood in general. And they asked people to engage in a mood induction standardized task. This is a standard task that's used in a lot of research in affect and cognition to put people into a bad mood. But not an angry mood, but more of a sad mood. You are about to listen to a piece of not particularly happy music. It's meant to create a temporary sad mood. We would also like you to recall a sad event or memory from your life and think about it while you listen to the music. Music can be personal and it may affect people differently. Try to create a sad mood, think about or notice the sadness. So for 10 minutes, you would ask people to think about sad things while they listen to this music.
Bags, thermostat.
No. This is why I have YouTube Premium. I cannot bear this kind of thing. So let's just, but I'm not logged in. There are very few services I think are worth paying for. YouTube Premium, worth paying for. So for 10 minutes, you're going to listen to some Russian classical music that's been slowed down. Alexander Nevsky. Russia under the Mongolian yoke. And then just think about how sad events have happened. We're not going to do this for 10 minutes, but for 10 minutes, imagine listening to that and thinking about, like when you had to put your cat to sleep, and how sad that was, or how you failed at something, or you let your parents down. Imagine it sort of spirals so that after 10 minutes, you're really in a negative space. Then what we're going to do is we're going to ask you periodically to it's called a visual analog scale. It's a slider from 0 to 100. And then you just say, how sad am I right now? And you just click on the screen how sad you are. And what you should say after listening to that music and thinking about all the sad things and all the ways you've disappointed all the people that you were important to you, you should say that you're in a sad mood. And let me just quit this again, because every time I click out of it. And so here's a lot of different conditions here. And what they discovered, what David Dozwa and his grad students discovered, is that right after the mood induction procedure, listening to sad music and thinking of a memory kind of make you sadder. So this is the sadness scale. This is like 100, unimaginable sadness, 0, absolutely no sadness at all. And baseline is kind of like, I guess at any given time, I'm a little sad, right? So that's just like if nothing happens. And what they found is that after 4 minutes, and in between each 2 minutes, participants were just asked to do simple math problems like single digit addition. That's really easy, and there's no feedback on. You just kind of do something for a little bit so that you're not thinking about the sad music. And then we ask you again, are you still sad? 2 minutes later, yeah, I'm still sad, but not as much. 4 minutes later, I guess I'm a little sad. And then you're pretty much with everyone else. So after 2 to 4 minutes, the strongest that we could make people feel sad by asking them to think about and reflect on sad events while they're listening to sad music only lasts 2 to 4 minutes. So it's kind of artificial. So if we're going to study the effects of positive and negative mood, we've got to do something that we can study in a series of a few minutes. So here's one way. You can ask them to simply classify a set of stimuli. Make people sad, and then you ask them, classify which one of these two shapes, shape over here or the shape over here, best matches the target. In other words, of the three, which one of these two goes along with the target? People in the sad mood, the negative mood sadness participants, were more likely to choose objects based on the local feature. Negative mood, local features suggest they're not paying attention as much to the overall structure of the task. People put in a happy mood or negative mood by asking to write a story about a correspondingly happy or sad event. Negative mood subjects more likely to choose features based on the local match. Yeah.
In like the previous slide, it said like a sad mood, you make faster responses to like global targets.
Yeah.
So then why would here they like prefer a local one?
I think I have it written backwards is the reason.
Oh.
You're exactly right. I cited this very study, Glasper and Clore, and I think I've written it backwards on the slide.
So they should be faster to local.
They should be faster to global.
Global.
Negative mood faster to global, positive mood faster to local.
Then this, because in the textbook, this one does say that they did prefer local.
Yeah. Let me check to make sure that there isn't a change in the negative mood, that I haven't steered you down the wrong path. Maybe they're both. Maybe the previous slide is incorrect. Okay. Ignore this for a minute until I check my work to make sure that I've cited the proper study. Because both of these things, which was the point of the 3 slides prior to that, it depends on the aspect of the negative mood. And I have to admit, I cannot remember whether or not this study induced a sad mood or an angry mood.
It was sad.
It was sad?
It was sad.
Okay, so this is probably incorrect. Let me verify this. I will not have a quiz item or an exam item on this particular task until I can verify the accuracy of it. So do not expect this question to show up on the quiz of the exam. Is that okay? Thank you for that. Let me move on to a study that I do know the answer to, because this is one from my lab, where we were interested in both negative mood and positive mood. So not so much sadness, anger, happiness, etc. We just wanted to go positive and negative and look at the effects on cognitive flexibility. And so we did this in a couple of ways. This is going to be a certain similar task to what the motivational regulatory fit task looked at. So we're going to look at a category structure that either encourages flexibility or does not encourage flexibility. And this was research that 2 of my graduate students did a number of years ago. We employed a 2-stage mood induction procedure. So first, we asked participants to listen to a piece of music. We had a lot of participants rate different pieces of music for their positive vibes, their neutral vibes, meaning that it didn't seem to have much effect at all, but it was engaging, and negative. So we got a piece of really positive music, a piece of really negative music, and then we asked participants to watch short videos. I won't click on them now, but you can watch them later. And essentially one of them is a very short clip of a baby that's laughing, which puts most people in a good mood, because you don't have to know why the baby is laughing, but just a little laughing baby mostly makes people sort of positive. So combined with positive music, upbeat music, happy baby laughing also makes you have a more positive disposition. experience. And we predicted that this would increase cognitive flexibility. The negative mood condition was to listen to a piece of really negative music, the soundtrack from Schindler's List, which is kind of a sad piece of music. And at the time to watch a report from an earthquake that killed some number of hundred of people, which involved a lot of people expressing sadness and crying. So a lot of happiness in one case and a lot of sadness in the other case. First you hear music, then you see a video. Does that make sense to everybody? Then we asked them to perform a perceptual classification task. In the perceptual classification task, participants always see a single image on the screen. You've seen these before in some of the other experiments that we talked about, but these are individual stimuli that vary in terms of the number of light and dark bands. So that's the frequency. Lots of bands, if they're really skinny and a lot of them packed together, that's high frequency. If there are fewer, that's lower frequency. And also the orientation. They can either tilt to the left or tilt to the right. So you got two pieces of information you can pay attention to. These are able to be described and able to be processed separately. Your job was just to point to which of the two wizards owned that particular set of crystal balls. So if this one belonged to the blue wizard, you would click the blue wizard and you would get feedback, correct or incorrect. And you would do this over and over again for 320 trials until you learned how to classify the whole set. And most participants could get through somewhere between 60 and 80% correct at the end of 320 trials. Depending on the condition you were in, you learned a set that was either rule described, meaning that it had a rule that you could describe verbally. A rule described category structure in this case was the example that we used was that the frequency of the light and dark bands was the rule that you needed to pay attention to, a single feature. Things that were higher in frequency, slightly more light and dark bands, were classified as belonging to one wizard, and the stimuli on the left side here were ones that were slightly thicker, lower spatial frequency. It's barely perceptible. As you can see, these are really close, but these are just a little thicker than these. Does everybody see that barely perceptible difference? That's because they're right on the boundary. What that also means is that you can see there's a lot of variability on the orientation. The angle switches around a lot. What most participants do when they are faced with this category structure and this set of stimuli is that they notice the perceptual changes of the tilt. They notice that really quickly and quickly realize that it doesn't work. So flexibility helps here because you need to first pay attention, you probably first pay attention to the orientation, then you hypothesis test, realize the orientation isn't predicting the correct response. Then you have to inhibit attention and look for what else might be varying and focus on the smaller, more difficult feature to determine, which is the spatial frequency of the light and dark band. So it requires some flexibility. The easy feature is irrelevant. The more difficult feature to notice is the one that's relevant. It's not difficult to solve this task, but it requires some flexibility. And so what we predicted was that if happy mood, positive mood, puts you in a state where you're experiencing more cognitive flexibility, you should perform better in that case. If negative mood puts you in a case where you're experiencing less cognitive flexibility, you should perform less well in this case. The other half of the participants learned the same kinds of stimuli, but organized in a way that was very difficult to describe the rule verbally. So both features matter. And if you pay attention to either one feature, it's not able to predict performance. And it's really difficult to describe the relationship between the two features with a verbalizable rule. So flexibility shouldn't help in this case. It shouldn't give you any particular advantage. And that's what we found. So for the rule-described category structure, positive mood participants started out, the first block of trials is 80 trials long. So that's 80 stimuli you need to classify. And then the next block and the next block and the next block. And they start off performing a little lower than 80% correct, and they maintain that advantage throughout the experiment. The negative mood participants start off significantly lower, and then generally achieve a level of performance that's on par with the neutral mood. So negative mood seems to hurt a little bit at the beginning, consistent with the idea that negative mood doesn't last very long. Positive mood helps at the beginning and continues on through the rest of the test. And we don't see any effect on the non-rule described category structure. So the one that doesn't have a rule shows no benefit. Participants who learn in the happy mood are performing just as badly as participants who perform in the neutral mood and the sad. Performance is significantly different from block 4 from block 1. So they do learn the category structure, but they learn it with this slow, gradual stimulus response association. So happy mood helps. Does that make sense? Another way in which a task or an environment can affect your performance is the idea of self-control. So this goes back to the first examples we talked about. Driving under bad situations might reduce your cognitive flexibility for subsequent tasks. We talked about Michelle's marshmallow task. Delayed gratification requires some degree of cognitive control. And so a lot of research that was carried out in the 1990s through the mid-2010s looked at whether or not this is something that is measurable and whether or not it's something that affects performance in multiple tasks. If a task, even if there are different tasks on the surface, depend on cognitive control, is this cognitive control a limited resource? The literature suggests that it is, with some caveats that I'll talk about. So this was originally discovered by Roy Baumeister. Baumeister distinguished between cognitive depletion, which he called ego depletion, meaning the ability to control your own thoughts, from simple fatigue. Fatigue is not the same. General fatigue is not the same as cognitive resource depletion. They interact, and fatigue has some of the same effects, but what they determined was that people can show cognitive depletion even when they're not necessarily fatigued. I'll talk about fatigue in a little bit. And so some of these tasks are a little bit goofy. Performing an act of self-regulation on subsequent task suggests that these two types of tasks share resources. So for example, in his first study, participants were asked to solve puzzles, kind of like what you might solve on your phone if you're doing New York Times games like Connections, Wordle, Strands, etc. Any of those great New York Times word games. Puzzle games, right? Some of them are more difficult than others. And what they determined is that you spend longer at doing the tasks and can do them better if you have more resource control. The participants who forced themselves to eat radishes when chocolates were available. This is a lot like Walter Mischel's marshmallow task. So in this case, you see the chocolates and the lab smells like chocolates, but you're asked to avoid the chocolates and make yourself eat radishes instead. Not that radishes are bad, but generally speaking, given the choice between two, most people like to snack on chocolates and not on radishes. And so they displayed reduced persistence. And the suggestion is they were using up some cognitive resources, ignoring the chocolate. And when it came time to do the puzzle solving task, it was a little bit less. Not a lot, but a little bit less. You tend to depend more heavily on heuristics. So you're more likely to pay attention to use the heuristics that tap into system 1 thinking versus system 2 thinking. If you have to regulate your emotions, you've all probably been in situations where you've had to regulate your emotions, either not laughing at something that's funny when you're not supposed to laugh. That requires some emotional regulation. Have you ever been in the situation where you're not supposed to laugh and it's really hard to not laugh once you start thinking about laughing? Like at a funeral, for example, and somebody starts laughing about something. These participants performed poorly on subsequent tasks of working memory. Some research, which it's not clear how many of these have replicated, and I'll talk about that in a minute, have suggested that there's even some brain activity, measurable blood glucose. In other words, you can kind of replenish a little bit of your depleted resources by eating something or drinking something. We looked at this in my lab a few years ago with a lot of the same kind of methodology. So around the same time that we were studying mood and cognition and category learning, we were also interested in what else affects people's ability to learn rules or not learn rules. And some of my students carried out an experiment where we used a rule described and a non-rule described task, the same one that I just showed you. But instead of manipulating people's mood, we manipulated the degree of cognitive control that they had by asking them to do a cognitive task first. So general idea was cognitive depletion or a control task, and ask them to learn either a rule described or a non-rule described task. And the ego depletion task was one that's been used in the literature before. And this is where you have to write a story, not a story about something that is sad or happy, but just a general event that happened. But you need to spend 10 minutes writing a story without using the letters A or N. This can be really challenging because those are common letters. And so what is suggested by this task is that when you're trying to write this story, you need to think of words that don't use those letters. And if you write one of those words, you erase it. And then you have to come up with some other words. And so there's a lot of cognitive control there. There's a lot of inhibitory control. You have to force yourself not to use words that contain A or N. And the suggestion is that you can write a story, but it would have been a little bit harder, a little bit more challenging. You should be a little bit cognitively tired out after that relative to the other group that just had 10 minutes to write the story. It's easier to do that. You could probably imagine a modern version of this where I ask you to summarize a paper, either with Anthropic, Claude, or Gemini, or without, and do it yourself. Right? So if you get into the habit of relying on generative AI to summarize things, it might be kind of hard to not do it. The group here would be the group without using the AI. So you can imagine a version of this task that is that uses different methodologies, but taps into the same idea of basically just working harder to ignore the tendency to want to use AI in this case and not using it here. That experiment hasn't been done exactly, but it's one that might be carried out using some of the same predictions. And then we asked him to learn exactly the same category structure, one that requires a rule and benefits from cognitive flexibility, and one that doesn't require a rule and doesn't benefit from cognitive flexibility. And what we found was kind of the reverse pattern, where the manipulation in this case reduced your performance. Control subjects learned this rule-described category set pretty well as we would have expected participants in a control condition to learn. Participants who had engaged in the story writing task for 10 minutes without using A and N were significantly impaired. And their impairment continued even in the final block. So it wasn't as if it was something they could catch up with. At the beginning, performance was pretty much matched, but in block 2, 3, and 4, their performance was reduced. And we didn't see an effect for the category structures for which cognitive flexibility is not beneficial. For the category structure that builds off of stimulus-response association, mood doesn't seem to make a difference, and cognitive resource depletion doesn't seem to make a difference. Those tasks don't make use of cognitive flexibility. They just make use of stimulus-response association. Sometimes even this positive mood has been found to reduce the overall ego depletion effect. So if you're in this sort of tired condition, taking a break, eating something, putting yourself in a positive mood can help to reduce that effect, to kind of reset things a little bit. Okay, so how many of you have in other classes learned about reproducibility, replicability, and something that some social psychologists refer to as the replication crisis in psychology? Is this familiar to some of you? So this was an event, a series of events that kind of characterized mostly social psychology, but other areas of psychology as well, in which they realized that a lot of the things they thought they were studying didn't really work. A lot of the manipulations didn't work. A lot of the lab interventions weren't working as expected. And if that was the case, then maybe some of the phenomena that they uncovered, some of the effects they uncovered, and some of the theories that they'd been developing to explain these effects might not be explaining anything at all. So if you develop a theory to explain something and that thing that you're trying to explain isn't really very reproducible, then what's your theory trying to explain? That created a bit of a crisis. And ego depletion was one of these effects that had been studied for 20 years, with a lot of research suggesting that it was measurable and creatable and reproducible in a lab. I do want to distinguish between replication, which is carrying out an experiment and seeing if it replicates. In other words, use the same methods, find the same effect, and reproducibility. Reproducibility means that you can describe your experiment in such a way that another person could reproduce your methods and therefore try to replicate your results. What they discovered was that trying to replicate ego depletion effects wasn't always successful. But sometimes it was, depending on the task that was used. So after 20 years of discovering ego depletion, a large multi-lab pre-registered design, in other words, lots of labs chose exactly the same task. They used the same ego depletion intervention. They measured ego depletion performance in the same way. And across lots of different labs, they found that there was no effect. At the same time, two high-powered pre-registration experiments using a different manipulation, using over 1,000 experiments, found that there does seem to be a stable ego depletion effect. And it might have to do with the way in which the tasks are administered. This is a blog post that came out about 10 years ago around this time. It's not been a good month for the theory. A lot of researchers found this is not a stable effect. 23 labs participated. Total sample size of 2,141 participants, coordinated by several individuals, found that there was no effect. And by no effect, what that means is that each one of these labs ran exactly the same experiment. Everything to the right of this red line suggested a larger ego depletion effect. In other words, the effect size was a significant one, and one that was meaningful. And everything that overlapped this boundary suggested that the range of performance that was observed was not one that would support a significant rejection of a null hypothesis. And what you could see is that with a couple of small exceptions, everything just overlaps this boundary. There's enough variability in this sample to suggest that when you perform this particular task, maybe people aren't depleted at all. Problem was that's only one task. The task that they chose to study for ego depletion is one in which you have to cross out specific letters in a paragraph of text. And maybe that isn't depleting enough. Maybe there's a difference between crossing out particular letters and the kind of depletion we've talked about in other cases, like maybe writing a whole story or driving while somebody is arguing behind you, or having to engage in something that's really tiring. So this is only one example. A paper that came out only a few years ago, more recently, looked at long-scale ego depletion and cognitive fatigue. This is really different. So one of the issues that a lot of researchers, and I guess myself too, have had with this work is that all of these studies focused on one intervention of ego depletion, a 10-minute task in which you essentially cross out individual letters on some text. It's a little bit demanding, but it's not that demanding. It's basically a proofreading task. You can do it, and it may not be enough to actually change your performance. What the next task was looking at is, next experiment is looking at is something that's a lot more demanding. The kind of thing that might reflect the kind of demands that you or I might have in our jobs if our jobs are very demanding. So this is a neurometabolic account. This looks at how the brain interacts with thinking and deciding in different ways, about how day-long cognitive work alters the control of economic decisions. Another way to say that is that if you do something that's really hard all day long, cognitively demanding, at the end of the day, you make worse decisions about your money. So do not make investment decisions at the end of a long workday. Make your investment decisions at the beginning of the day or in the middle of the day when you're thinking about it, because this research is going to suggest not only that you will make worse decisions, but it's going to give you a really good reason why. So here's what they did. First of all, they had a number of different tasks that were cognitively demanding. People performed cognitive tasks, which we're going to call an end switch and an end back task. I'll explain them on the next slide, that require cognitive control for 6 and almost 6.5 hours. That's like an average working day with a lunch break. So this is all day long doing these cognitive tasks. They paid their participants. This is like a job, right? This is the kind of job that you might not want, but it's like a really hard job, quality control job. And then we're going to ask you to make some decisions. So we're going to give you tasks that induce fatigue, and then interspersed with that, we're going to give you choice trials that reveal fatigue. Let me go through these in detail. So during end switch blocks, so the tasks were set up this way. Here's the 6 hours here, and you were either in the hard condition or the easy condition. So across the 6 hours, you did a 75-minute session. Each 75-minute session included a block, and a block. And for each of these sessions afterwards, you took a break. After the series of blocks that induced fatigue, you were then given some series of choices that revealed fatigue. So 24 trials, 4 choices. 24 trials, 4 choices. 75 times in a row, you do these, and then you take a 10-minute break. That's a really demanding day. The tasks worked this way. During end switch tasks, participants had to perform a discrimination task that depended on the color of the letter. Uppercase, so you would press one button if you saw uppercase, and lowercase for one color versus vowel and consonant for the other color. So that's already a challenging task. In other words, when it was presented in green, you had to press one button for uppercase and the other button for lowercase. When it was presented in red, you had to ignore case and pay attention to vowel and consonant. Does that make sense? So you could do this. You could do this without much difficulty. But the easy version, every block of trials, in other words, every 24 trials, you followed the same rule. For the hard version of the task, you had to switch the rule. In other words, color and the color rule switched between different colors. So if it was red, you were doing vowel consonant, and then it would switch. If it was red, you were doing uppercase, lowercase. You would get instructions every 2 trials. So 12 switches in 24 trials means that the rule switches almost every trial. And so you're trying to pay attention to what the rule is. So for 24 trials, you're not only doing a difficult discrimination task, but the rule is switching on you each time. So there's no consistency. This is a really hard task to do. And then you make some choices in which essentially they all boil down to taking more money now is the less economically sensible thing to do. This is basically a gamble version of the marshmallow task. You're taking the immediate reward. And these tasks have been shown to reveal cognitive fatigue. People in a fatigued situation are more likely to take the reward now than wait for a reward later. So in other words, you're making less sensible investments. So that was one set of tasks. The other type of tasks using the same set of stimuli, which you also did, by the way. So in addition to doing 75 end back tasks, you would then switch to doing 75 end back blocks, in which you had to indicate whether the letter on the screen was the same as the letter presented 3 trials or 1 trial before. So for 75 minutes, you're responding to switches and following a rule. Then you have to pay attention to saying yes or no. Is this letter the same as the letter that appeared right before, or the letter that appeared 3 letters before? So in the hard condition, you have to keep a running working memory tally of 4 trials in a row, always responding yes or no. So you can see where this is going to be a really difficult task. Amazingly, participants can actually perform better than chance if they're not doing anything else. So you can learn to do these tasks. It's just really hard. Does that make sense to everybody? So you've got 2 kinds of easy tasks, 2 kinds of hard tasks. And if you're in the hard job, you switch between these different kinds of hard jobs, hard tasks, taking 10-minute breaks. A choice for low-cost options suggests an objective marker of cognitive fatigue. So when you take the money now, take less money now, that is more fatigue. So here's what they found. Let me show you a couple of series of results. First of all, the behavioral results and then the neuroscience results. Participants performed well all day long. So this is task performance. Even in the hard condition, which is plotted in orange, participants were able to perform above 80% correct. So they're able to do the task from the beginning of the session to the end. They're a little bit better in the easy version. And their subjective rating of how tired they are gets higher. So as the day goes on, they rate themselves as being more fatigued. At the beginning of the day, you're fresh. At the end of the day, you've got fatigue. And not surprisingly, people in the hard condition showed a bias for low-cost payoff options. This is just a bias parameter showing across all of those different trials, how likely are you to pick the low-cost option in the hard condition after the first trial, which is the first time in which you would be fatigued. You're showing a significant bias for those low-cost options. So when you're doing hard cognitive work, you're more likely to take the reward now, less likely to defer the marshmallow to later. What's the reason why? They also measured the level of glutamate in the prefrontal area of your brain. And they do this by measuring the chemical shift in an area. They measure several different areas, but what they're interested in is this prefrontal cortex. And what they found is that in the prefrontal cortex, in the hard condition, across the first trial, the second trial, and the third trial, excess glutamate is found in the prefrontal region. Glutamate is a neurotransmitter, but it's also a neurotoxin. So excess glutamate can result in cell death in the long haul. This is not suggesting that your cells are dying in this task. The suggestion that the researchers prefer is that the excess glutamate is a signal to you to not continue on. And if you continue on in these tasks, you're likely going to reduce your performance. And the suggestion is the excess glutamate is something that your body would then react to find an easier job or to take a break or to do something that's going to be a little bit less cognitively demanding. So doing something really hard not only changes your performance, but it also changes your brain chemistry in a way that makes it impossible for you to ignore. This suggests that even though some of these ego depletion results didn't or don't replicate across different labs, there really is a neurometabolic thing happening. So when you do something that's cognitively demanding for a long enough time, even for 75 minutes, your brain reacts. It does know that you're doing something hard. Your behavior reacts accordingly. Does that seem straightforward and clear? Okay, excellent. Let's talk about local interference. We'll go through this one pretty quickly, and then we'll talk a little bit about how this affects both low-level perceptual effects and high-level problem-solving effects. And that will be it for the day. I anticipate we'll be finished around 12:05. Okay, so we've used this image before. This is just, you got a lot of activity going on. Most of us know to turn off notifications on our phone when we need to pay attention to stuff, as I've done today rather than last week. So no notifications can come in. I can't be distracted. So long ago, long before people started carrying smartphones, when we all still called them cell phones, this was something that people were worried about. And they were just wondering what happens when you receive a smartphone or a cell phone notification. Does your performance change in a task that requires vigilance? The task that requires vigilance in this case is called the sustained attention to response task. Participants are instructed to press a key when a number is flashed. So every time you see a number, you have to press the key. I see a number. And when anything else is presented, like the fixation cross, you don't press your key. So you want to press the key, and we want to see how quickly you can press the key. So this is like, how quickly can you respond to a number being presented? But except when the number is 3. When a 3 is presented, you must withhold your response and not press. So this is one of these things where you're trying to press the key as fast as possible every time a number comes up, but if a certain number comes up, you don't press. So it's called a withholding response or a no-go response. And what should happen is that every so often, you would probably make a mistake. You'd make an error of commission. You would press the key when a 3 shows up because you were expecting something else. We can manipulate that and we can measure something. So if there's anything else interfering with your attention, you're more likely to make commission errors when you see that 3. You're more likely to make a mistake. And that's what they found. So this is the probability of making a commission error isn't that high overall, but people do it over hundreds of trials. You're always going to make some mistakes. They set this up as a 2-phase experiment. In the first phase, in block 1, there was no difference. Everybody was essentially a control because you just did the task. And so we can see that on average, people make somewhere between 30 and 40% commission errors. Then they asked participants to either have no notification, which is in block 2, you do the same task and you turn your notifications off, no notifications coming through your phone, right? So you shouldn't differ because block 1 had nothing, block 2 also had nothing, and you can see there's no difference in the control condition. They had 2 other conditions. When you registered for the experiment, you were asked to provide your mobile phone number for follow-up at the beginning of the experiment. Unknown to you, during the time when you were trying to do the experimenter set up a script that would send you random text messages throughout the experiment. So suddenly you're getting bothered by text messages from the experimenter in the middle of the experiment. And that, when you get a text message, increases the number of commission errors. It increases the number of commission errors even more when the message was an actual call versus a text message. For most of us, that's probably accurate, right? When you get a notification that a message comes in, it's a short little vibration or a short ping. When you get a notification that a call is coming in, it feels more incessant, isn't it? It kind of pulses a lot if you've got it on vibrate. And if it's ringing, it makes a different kind of sound. So getting a call sounds more important than getting a text message because people send you messages all day long, but they only call you if it's really important. And that seems to affect their performance. So they're worse at this vigilance task when the call was coming from the experimenter's office. Text message affects you a little bit, call affects you even more. And the suggestion is that it's enough to take your attention off of the task for a few seconds, and maybe you make those commission errors. You start pressing 3, the button when the 3 occurs when you're not supposed to. Does that make sense? Last set of experiments I want to talk about has to do with not just local interference, like a message coming, but has to do with overall experience. So for example, how many of you find yourself working in an experience like this? This appears to be any random cafe, but this could easily be Black Walnut, right? Black Walnut on Richmond Street at any given day, there's a lot of people there. Have you ever tried to do work in a busy environment like this? It's not easy, right? Because there's a lot of activity going on. But some people like to work in an environment where there's ambient noise. So this is one extreme. This is a really busy environment to work in. This is another extreme. This is a much quieter environment to work in. How many of you prefer total quiet to work in? How many of you prefer, when you're studying or working, a little bit of noise, a little bit of ambient noise? There's preferences. Not everybody has the same preference. But there also seem to be differences. So some research that was carried out by some business profs looked at whether or not ambient noise affects people's creativity. And creativity in this case is, they were studying creativity, but they really mean is cognitive flexibility. Because the creativity measure in this case, which I'm going to talk more about creativity in a few weeks, has to do with increased cognitive flexibility. What they hypothesized was that total quiet and really busy noise, so in other words, really busy versus total quiet, might not be optimal for cognitive flexibility. Because when it's really noisy, you might not be able to inhibit all of that noise to be able to focus on what you're trying to do. But when it's really quiet, the small distractions maybe that are coming from inside your head are amplified. I don't know about you, but if I'm trying to work in complete total silence, I sometimes start getting distracted, start paying attention to other thoughts that come in. And maybe there's a sweet spot in the middle, which is a little bit of ambient noise, like a half busy cafe, where people are talking, but you can't hear what they're saying. but you can just hear a murmur of conversation. That's what they tried to simulate. They created ambient noise reflecting a typical consumption context. We blended a combination of multi-talker noise in a cafeteria, roadside traffic, distant construction noise to create a soundtrack of constantly varying background noise. This would be the kind of background noise that you would experience in a not too crowded cafe somewhere, or maybe a study lounge on campus that isn't totally packed, but isn't completely quiet. And then they adjusted the volume to make it low, moderate, and high. So there's sort of this moderate in-between level. Then they asked participants to complete what's known as a remote associate task. And the remote associate task is kind of related to, I referred to those New York Times word games, connections, right? Connections is the one where you have to come up with a theme for 4 different words to connect them together. The remote associate task is related to that. You get 3 words and you have to come up with a 4th word that pulls them all together. So for example, if the stimulus words shelf, read, and end, the correct response is book. And you can see how this is exactly like the New York Times connections game. And what turns out to be true is that people who score higher on other measures of flexibility and creativity can solve more of these problems. And so what they hypothesized is that people in the medium ambient noise condition will solve more of these problems. So they give them, they also ask them to rate their mood, a few other things, put them in this lab, controlled the amount of noise level. And what they basically found was that for noise conditions, low, medium, and high, control is no noise at all, just on average. The medium condition seemed to perform better. They solved more of these problems significantly than the low and high noise. Something about high noise makes it harder, and low noise also makes it a little bit harder. This middle noise allows you to obtain a little bit higher level of abstraction to be able to solve a problem like this. One of my grad students, Emily, a few years ago, tried to do this with a number of other kinds of tasks. And what she used was, what we used in our lab was basically just ambient background noise. So now you're just kind of sitting, whoops. This just sounds like there's people outside eating, having coffee, having conversations, but you can't hear any distinct conversation. And we looked at a range of different background noise conditions and a range of different noise levels. I'm not going to create a breakdown. And then we asked them to do a series of different problems. We asked them to do a more complicated version of the remote associate tasks, a lot more trials. We asked them to solve insight problems, which we'll see in a few weeks when we talk about problem solving. Insight problems are ones that benefit from flexibility because they often ask you to think about the problem from a different perspective. We also asked them to engage in something called an alternative use task, where you're given an object and you have to think of all the number of different ways in which that object can be used. Gave them some open-ended questionnaires at the end, and what we found was a similar set of results. For different conditions, for example, for this compound remote associate task, we found advantages for the medium difficulty items. So an interaction between task difficulty and noise level. People were better for these medium difficulty items. For the noise condition, control was no noise in the lab at all, just general. High noise reduced people's performance. Medium noise seemed to improve their performance. So there seems to be something there that for certain kinds of tasks that benefit from a degree of cognitive flexibility, sometimes having a little bit of noise seems to help. The amount of inhibition it takes to ignore low-level ambient noise may actually help when you're trying to solve a problem that requires some flexibility. Yeah.
So you were in complete silence and you had like your music playing at a low a medium volume that
Yeah.
categorized like a medium.
That might work. So we didn't look specifically at music. And one of the reasons we tried the ambient noise versus the music is that music can be more distracting in the sense that there might be lyrics that go with it. There might be certain melodies that catch your attention. And so we were looking for something, and I think this is what the original study was looking at as well, looking for something that is able to block out things that might distract your ability to solve a problem, but not enough to carry your attention away. So in a different version of this task, which was in some of our pilot work, we also had participants listen to an audiobook, which not surprisingly reduced their performance. So if you're trying to listen to somebody reading a book, you get worse. And music would probably have a similar effect. But the volume has something to do with it. There's something about this medium volume that seems to allow enough abstraction and is just difficult enough that you can inhibit it without working on it, which then allows for this additional cognitive flexibility. The neural mechanisms for this aren't yet fully understood, and it's something that I think there still demands a little bit more research. I think I'm near the end here. Okay, I am near the end. This is perfect timing. So take home message for this. And this is a great day for this because this is a day when most of us, because of the time change, feel a little bit fatigued. I certainly do. Situation, context, mood, and motivation can all affect how you think. And as we've discussed in a lot of different lectures, System 1 picks up the slack, right? System 1 is always there to help. It's like your reliable friend. It's there giving you the solutions. It's giving you behaviors, helping you plan actions. And it's sometimes wrong because it's based on availability and memory. So one of the things you might want to do is take a little bit of time to think about your own approach to things. Do you tend to be gain focused? Do you tend to be loss focused? Do you do well under pressure? Some people do, some people don't. Do you like ambient noise or not? So you might find cases where you can test your own ability to see how you perform well. And seek out the conditions that help you succeed depending on the situation that you're in. Okay. I guess you don't really need the QR code because you've got the link on your slides, but this is how you can let me know if there's anything you'd like me to discuss at the beginning of next week. Otherwise, I hope you have a good week, and I'll see you back in this same place. Hopefully no new cockroaches, and we'll continue on with our lectures. Have a good week, everyone.
Next cockroach here this morning.
Bye. Let me just stop the recording.
Lori is my.
The university?
Yeah.
Not medicine.
Predicting.